Greetings. It's the MattKatt back here. Sorry for the delay, folks. Been working on a new project. Today we're premiering the first part of my martial arts analysis. I'm going to be doing video game martial art analysis for the big name games of the era, including, as you see, Street Fighter 4. And today, the subject is Ken Masters. Ken Masters is one of the biggest names in the Street Fighter world. Rival to the Ryu, master of Anatsuken martial arts, or is he? That's the question we're asking today. Is Ken Masters truly a karate master, or is he something more unique? Perhaps creating something completely different from his rival and contemporary, Ryu. So, with that in mind, let's get started. Now, the first question. What is it about Ken that separates him from everybody else? Other than the flaming kicks, the super uppercut, the fireball, the stuff that, as of this time, we don't have a reality-based comparison for. You know, you can't do fireballs in real life yet. Although, one day. Who knows, right? But Ken does have a basis in real martial art, as does Ryu. His martial art, Anatsuken, is based upon an actual martial art known as Shotokan, one which I actually did study, and as you can see, is very much based upon the hard stance style. Stance is extremely important. Yet Ken seems to deviate from the common stance that is used by Shotokan and its well, not parody, but its video game equivalent, Anatsuken. What makes him different? Well, for starters, the traditional martial art that you see, as demonstrated by Ryu, is very rigid, very structured, very, very stance-based. Yet Ken has seemingly deviated from this severely. Much of his fighting style is much more flowing and open, less reliant on rigid stance, and more reliant on speed and maneuverability. For example, look here. He's actually trying to turn his back to his opponent. And then, as he prepares to unleash a flurry of kicks, he whirls himself back around like a top. This is actually something you see in Taekwondo, as you can see on the screen. These massive, high-speed multi-kicks are commonplace in martial arts demonstrations in Taekwondo. You see them oftentimes in the higher level stuff out of Japan, Korea, particularly in Korea. South Korea in particular, as you see a lot of it. So why is it that he uses a fighting style that seems to blend Shotokan, Taekwondo, and a variety of unique traits? Well, because for him, it works. In the comics and in the animated series of material, Ken is often shown to be a little bit less rigid in his viewpoint about martial arts. He does not stick to the strict stance or style that he is taught. Instead, he forms more powerful, more rotational fighting styles. His kicks, punches, the majority of his moves do not have the straight, direct attack that his contemporary Ryu does. Unlike Ryu, all of his kicks and punches, save for some of his lower level one, have hooks, rotation, or some sort of turn as part of their movement. In a way, he fights in a style that blends the power and rotation of Taekwondo and other leg-based martial arts with the stance and defensive abilities that Shotokan and Anatsuken demonstrate. For example, watch his uppercut punches, his right hooks. They all have a hook or a turn to them. Even his low kicks have a slight turn to them. His low punches, his weak punches, and low kicks have very little turn. So you can see that when he wants to hurt his target, he uses rotation, spin, like that. Whereas Ryu is almost always rigid in his fighting style. Ken is all about movement, trying to build up momentum to land that heavy blow. In a way, you can say that he takes the impact of a Taekwondo fight and mixes it with the defense of traditional karate. Now, as you can see, his blocks are even rotational. He pulls himself away so he absorbs less of the damage. His axe kicks, punches, and uppercuts demonstrate rotation as part of the movement. Even his Shoryuken has a certain amount of turn to it as he rises. Also, his spinning kick, as you see here, has more speed and rotation than Ryu's does, though not quite to the same level of, say, Akuma. In a way, Akuma, Ryu, and Ken represent three stages of the fighting style. Ryu is the rigid, staunch, stoic fighter. He follows the style with almost pure, perfect intensity. Ryu uses it exactly as it's intended, which gives him strength but less flexibility. Ken uses the flexibility to give himself better speed and more impact, but it means that his defense is not quite as potent. He also doesn't have quite as strong a hard counter to other characters. And with Makoto, I'll show you what we mean.
It's the battle of the century.
Watch as she moves. She uses one of the most rigid fighting styles in the game. Yet her moves are so quick they'll punch right through his defense. If you're not fast enough, she goes straight through it. So how do you counter? Offense. You drive forward and constantly punish her, pummeling and pounding her so that she doesn't have a chance to build up momentum. This gives Ken the advantage and allows him to finish her off with rapid kicks and punches. On the other hand, if she were to play a more offensive game, she might break through and defeat him quickly. But she has to defend because she's constantly under pressure from his assault. You see this in his jumping, kicking, and high-speed movement around the arena, where even in his ready stance, he bounces a little as if he's ready to jump. Now on the other hand, Makoto has a very straight stance and doesn't move much except when attacking. This means that she hits hard and is very quick on the draw, but her footwork and ability to absorb pressure is limited, giving Ken a significant advantage against her. All in all, Ken will win simply because he is more flowing and open to adaptation rather than being the stoic brute force that she is. And that is Ken's greatest gift, adaptation. He has adapted the fighting style he learned to suit his style and way of life. And we'll get to that near the end, but you see it in everything he does. He doesn't fight with the same rigid, almost purely rule-based fighting style that Ryu does, as you'll see in a moment. Ryu is very rigid, doesn't move a lot, and only breaks out of his stance to attack. Ken, on the other hand, almost abandons stance to keep a constant beat and flow. Even when doing his uppercut, he actually steps into it farther to land more hits. His punches, kicks, when they combo together, you see how they rotate into each other, rather than being the 1 or 2 hit pounds that Ryu uses. Ryu hits with more force, yet Ken can land more blows in succession. And even his kick right there is a rotation into the body. Ken is a bit egotistical, but he's learned to use that style and skill to suit his fighting ability. And right there you can see it, a 6-hit combo with all the moves rotating into each other. Whereas Ryu, because he's so rigid, can't break loose from it. He's relying solely on close combat, the fireball, and he's not trying to combo, so he's getting hammered. He will break out with a throw or another technique, but it doesn't add up to enough to stop Ken's onslaught. And eventually Ken breaks through, and it's over. This is representative of the fighting style difference between the two. Ken is all about motion and speed. Ryu is about defense and solid return. He blocks and then hits you back. He blocks and then counters your blow. He blocks and unleashes a fireball. Whereas Ken is diving in and hammering at you non-stop. In fact, you can see that I rarely have to block, because I'm always on the offense. I like that about Ken, and in fact, one of my favorite characters, Dudley, uses the same type of fighting style with a unique hook. And here we'll see exactly why Ken's style works, but why it also has a few hard counters. Now here's Balrog. Dirty boxer, brute fighter, sheer powerhouse. Nothing but powerhouse, really. Not a whole lot going on upstairs, but you can see he knows his fighting style well enough to try and get through the defenses. Like that, he just turned it and pounded right through. Yet with Ken, I'm keeping him off angle with change-ups, uppercuts, and high kicks and sweeps, completely changing his game because I'm not giving him a chance to build momentum. And that is where Balrog is at his weakest, is if he can't build momentum, he has no force. Yet I've actually played the exact other end of that, and if you let Balrog build enough momentum, he will essentially ram through even the best opponent. Here you see that Balrog is playing a defensive game and then trying to take advantage of open attacks, but I'm simply changing up my moves and punching right through. And that's the thing about Ken. Adaptation is key with him. If you know how to play with Ken, you can break right through your opponent and go straight in for the kill. Even in his victory, you can see that he uses movement and rotation. That final kick is a huge roundhouse because he's building up momentum with it as he takes that step forward. It's really interesting that he's such a break from Ryu's fighting style, yet they started as identical clones almost. And as time went on, they diverged them more and more and more, to the point where now they're almost completely unique. And we'll see how that stacks up against Gen and his unique two-style set of moves, where he can switch between styles, but neither style covers all angles. Gen is perhaps the most difficult character to learn, and if there's enough support, I will actually go ahead and do a video review of Gen's fighting style, but we'll get there. Now you see here with Gen, he is moving very, very, very carefully. He's using a defensive style and trying to find openings to break through my defenses so that he can close the distance and do damage. And that is where Gen is at his best. Close range, pressuring opponents. Yet because I'm constantly moving back and forth, it limits his options. Gen has very little anti-air, minus one or two moves. But he's at his best when he's at close range, pounding his opponent. In fact, some of his best moves are combos in which he can immediately go into his supers. Now here you see the pressure I'm putting on Gen. I go in, I land a few hits, and I retreat. Now Gen is trying to turn the table on me, and he's actually getting through, but I counter it and change my tactics to go right back into an uppercut. This is again that sort of adaptational style. Ryu could not combo into that as easily because his moves have a longer recovery time. Ken, because of the rotation, can actually counter straight into it. And that's based on a real martial arts principle in which you're constantly using your own body to give you more momentum and to drive yourself forward. And perhaps the best example of this is the comparison between these two characters here. Ken and Rufus are perfect examples of the same principle applied two different ways. And if you like, I can do one of these on Rufus as well. Now, Ken is of course going to fight the traditional way. Rufus, you'll see, is almost immediately going to try and pressure Ken. Goes immediately into the uppercut snake strike. Tries to get in and get close with the Messiah kicks. Wants to set up the Galactic Tornado. And I'm trying to use my own pressure to pin him down. And there's the Galactic Tornado there. I return with my own Hurricane Kick, but Rufus counters. And the two of them are going back and forth. Rufus is getting pressured, and I managed to get through, but I don't beat him the normal way. I chip damage him, and eventually break through thanks to chip damage. You can see that Rufus is actually a very good counter. When properly played, Rufus can be devastatingly effective against Ken because he takes the offensive ability away, and his moves are a strong enough counter that when performed correctly, you can use them to break through his defense. Now here I got lucky. Had this landed, it would have given Rufus a definite advantage. And I've actually used that technique before. Now mind you, I got lucky on this one because I managed to put him in enough of a pressure that I just pounded right through. But Rufus could have turned the tide. He just wasn't fast enough on the draw. But you see in Rufus how he uses his body, his mass, his bulk, to give him the momentum to land those powerful impacts. And that's what I like about the character, is that he's a uniquely designed character with an interesting style. Now, we're going to Seth, final battle. And Seth is, because of his supernatural nature, not a good comparison for real martial arts. But he does actually demonstrate a martial arts principle in the idea of using any technique that you can functionally work. You never limit yourself to one unique style, because that unfortunately makes you predictable. In fact, in my life, before work and other matters became a concern, I studied Taekwondo, Shotokan, Aikido, and kickboxing. Although my master actually said I probably should have gone in for judo, but man, it is what it is. Now you see here that Seth tries to use any technique at his disposal, and because he can have a massive amount of techniques, he uses them to try and pressure you and keep you at a distance. I turn the table on him by doing the exact same thing. I use the techniques I know that are effective, I close the distance, and I go straight at him. And I just don't let up the pressure if I can avoid it. And that's where you have the advantage with a character like Ken, is that he has a good enough combination of moves that he can almost constantly change up his techniques. Here he's really laying the pressure on, doing a lot of damage, hitting a lot of the best notes, and getting good solid combos. Seth is under pressure, can't counter it. So Seth turns the tables by, well, tries to turn the table by adapting new techniques.
And the battle continues. Fight!
And in a real fight, if you see that your moves aren't working, you look to find a new way of adapting your fighting style to give you an advantage. Now here, Seth isn't able to counter me, but you see he's changing his style. More aggressive, more intense. He misses a few opportunities to land some serious damage, but he's definitely turning the tables and trying to plant more damage on me with those uppercuts, that teleportation, and generally just trying to keep me on my toes, even blocking my full-on assault, but then he makes the mistake of not countering me and taking advantage of my vulnerability. Now in this case, Seth is making errors, but he's definitely trying to adapt. It's just that I'm more familiar with Ken and I can overwhelm him. But you see here the difference. Ken is an adaptational fighter, so is Seth, but Seth has so many moves, he doesn't have the structure, and it leaves him vulnerable. You can break through certain things because he becomes predictable with it. And here we get into the core of Ken's character and why he is the way he is. He is not Ryu, Gen, or a lot of the others. He's a family man. And he has a very, very devoted wife and a son, so he believes they are important. And he fights with a style that he thinks makes him strong because it works for him rather than sticking to the roots he was taught. He wants to protect them and do it on his terms, not anyone else's. And that's why he's effective. So, that's my analysis. And I'm going to continue doing these if you all want. But what I'll do is I'll take requests from any game I can get my hand on, so long as it has enough of a basis in martial arts for me to do this. Anyway, I will continue this series. If you all like it and want to have me do more characters, let me know. Otherwise, this is the MattKatt. Keep an eye out for another project shortly. Special Halloween project coming up. I will see you next time. Enjoy, folks.